All right, psychology nerds, welcome to Psychology and Stuff, the podcast Good Cause Productions at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. I'm your host, Alison Jane Martingano, and today we're going to be Mythbusting. I'm joined by fellow UWGB psychology faculty and Mythbuster, Danielle Sneyd. Dr. Sneyd joined the University of Wisconsin Green Bay last year as an assistant teaching professor of psychology. She holds dual undergraduate degrees, a BA in psychology and a BS in criminal justice. She went on to earn an MA in cognitive and social processing from Ball State University and later completed her PhD in legal psychology at Florida International University. Before coming to UW Green Bay, Dr. Sneyd spent 4 years teaching at Northland College in Ashland, Wisconsin. Her academic expertise lies at the intersection of psychology and law. At UWGB, she teaches a variety of courses, including forensic psychology and myths of the mind. All right, Danielle. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you. I know you're like the most popular psychology professor, pretty much.
I don't know if
I
that's
I don't know.
but I'll
I don't know all the other psychology professors that are listening right now, but my students talk so wonderful. You're beloved, absolutely beloved. And I've brought you on, obviously, because we are teaching together a new
Yes.
course called Myths of the Mind.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that to start. You're teaching it this semester, and then I'll start actually, I don't even think I've told you this yet, but now I will be teaching it next semester in one of the local prisons.
I
It's a
did
prison
not
course.
know.
Yes.
Oh, wow, that's
So,
so cool.
surprise.
So are you teaching it in the prisons only, or are you also teaching it for our students at UWGB?
Only in the prisons next semester, and then starting next year, I'll be teaching the in-person
Right.
version at GB.
Okay, so I'm teaching the online version at
Right.
GB. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry, students that wanted to take it with Danielle, you have to be incarcerated to take it with Danielle soon. But so tell me, why did you want to, and not just because I asked you to, teach
Yeah.
the myths in the mind class?
Yeah, so informational literacy, which is the category that that class falls under, is something that I find so important. So I'm currently teaching a capstone on pseudoscience, which also, like, although it's not listed as an official information literacy course, that's how I teach it. And so when that course kind of fades out, I really wanted to be able to teach another class because with the way technology is advancing, it's so important to have the skills to be able to differentiate misinformation from true information or even
Absolutely.
avoid disinformation. And so, helping students build those critical thinking skills is and the topics are so fun.
They are. And I was actually inspired to teach this course with you because of your capstone course and the truth booths
Yes.
that you hold. So tell me a little bit more about those truth booths.
Yeah, so the truth booths are an assignment that the capstone students have to do. It's the end of the year project in which we hold these booths that are open to the public. So anyone at GB or the community is welcome to stop by when the event is happening. And each student or a pair of students has picked a topic that they are going to debunk using psychological concepts. And they will walk you through why that particular thing is not real,
Yeah.
or at least not supported by science.
There are so many cool ones. When I came by one time, I think somebody had one about, like, the moon and werewolves or people going crazy. What are some of your favorites that you've seen?
Yeah, so we've had so many good ones. There was the lunar phases that you had just mentioned. I had students do subliminal messaging, lie detection, which we might talk about today. So the polygraph. Oh my gosh, there's just so many. They're all running through my students currently just submitted their project topics or what they want to do. So and they haven't finalized them yet, so I don't want to say anything that's not
Yeah, don't
definitely
spoil
gonna
it.
happen.
Yeah.
But like ghost ships were mentioned. Someone did the Bermuda Triangle in years
I
past.
remember that one, yes.
Learning styles, which we might also talk about today, has been myth busted. And so, like, the MBTI, my favorite thing to myth bust. So just so many interesting topics. So stay tuned for a reel later this semester from Good Cast.
Yes. And thank you for bringing up the MBTI. So anybody who's taken a personality psychology class with me, so I don't teach personality psychology very often, being a social psychologist.
Yeah.
But I love to rip into the MBTI. So people, if
Yeah.
you think that you are a INTFJ, you're not,
Yeah.
or it's a useless
And
classification.
intro psych students, stay tuned. We're gonna get there. You'll have a project on it.
So I brought up my little note sheet.
Yeah.
because I want to talk about some of these really common myths that in psychology we know have been debunked, or at least if they are true, they're only a tiny little bit true in some very small
Yeah.
kernel of way. So I want to go through each, get your take on why they're not true, and I'm also interested in why they're so popular, even though they're not true. Like
Mm,
that's really critical, I think.
yeah.
Okay, so the first one up: do we only use 10% of our brain, Danielle?
We definitely use more than 10% of our brain. Um, and that one's such an odd one because it doesn't even, like, make sense just on its face, but I think, like, media, like, just movies have really popularized, like, this idea that, like, maybe if we don't use it all, then there is this capacity that if we somehow could unlock it, then we'd get, like, magical powers, which is,
Right.
like, exciting, that everybody wants, like, right? Like, you let a spider bite you because you wanna become Spider-Man. You go into a cave hoping that you'll come out as Batman. But, like, yeah, so just that idea of wouldn't it be awesome if that was true, then maybe we could one day,
Yes.
like, do the
So
unthinkable.
we're just forever optimists. So we want this to be
Maybe.
true so that we can tap into our inner goddess or superhero.
I'd rather that than we're all just, like, not using like, that we're not just a society of non-critical thinkers, so
Yes. Okay. That's a different way of taking it. So let's talk about how we know this is definitely not true. So obviously, when the invention of
Mm.
brain imaging and scanning technology, this could very easily be debunked on a scientific level, right?
Yeah, right, we could put someone in an fMRI and ask them to do certain tasks and just see what areas of the brain have more blood flow, like, now we're not gonna be using 100% of our brain for every single task, and maybe that is where people pull some support, but, you know, more than 10% of the brain will light up for any given activity.
Right, right. And of course, even if you're not using all the brain for one task, you are going to use all of the brain across your day,
Throughout the
right?
day,
Yes,
yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we could dig into this just a teeny bit more because I'm thinking about the idea that our neurons start to degenerate after I think it's like 21 years old, right? So it's just as our college students are suddenly they're at their peak in terms of neurodensity. And then sort of the rest of your adult life it declines. And that's assumed to be a bad thing because like more neurons and more activation is considered better. But talk to me about like the subtleties behind that. Is that always true?
So, that's such a great question and definitely, like, beyond my particular area of expertise, but from the very limited knowledge that I have about neurons as a
That's all right. We're not,
non-neuroscientist
but
or
neither one of us is neuroscientists. We're good. They'll
would
watch
be
this in print.
that the, like, pruning process of removing neurons is only beneficial because it's helping you build stronger connections between, like, the remaining neurons. Just kind of like how memory fades over time intentionally, or, like, we only record the gist versions of things because if we had to do verbatim encoding, we would, like, not be able to get through a day because we just encounter so much information.
Right.
And so I think the idea of the neural pruning is supposed to be beneficial because otherwise we'd have too much connection with like frayed material that's not actually related or unneeded. But maybe that's completely wrong.
No, that's
So
that's
I'd
that's
love
how
to
I
hear your take.
that's how I remember it too, is that as you're building more connections so essentially you're born with this tangled mass of neurons,
Mm,
and they become organized, and it's like tidying up your house, and
yeah,
everything's in neat little boxes, and
spring
everything makes
cleaning.
sense. Exactly, and so as your brain gets spring cleaned, you also throw out some garbage along the way. This may be a very oversimplified metaphor.
I mean, I like it.
But what I think is cool about this is the idea that it's not always more that's better, right? So,
Mm,
for example, say you're learning to drive a car, and we know it's really hard to learn to drive a car. You firing on all cylinders. Your brain is as you're trying to do 500 things at once, and over time it becomes habitual. It becomes easy. So we're actually like using less brain power, but we're actually better at it. And I think that's a little hard for us to grasp sometimes. That maybe actually as we get better at something, we use less brain power to do it.
yeah, because it's that difference between that controlled, thoughtful process to that automatic, almost unconscious process, right? That's why we end up zoning out on the highway inappropriately and like, how did we get home? And it's because that process has become automated, which means it's easier,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm going to move on to number two now, which is not of neuroscience myths. So we should be slightly better at this one. Dreams have hidden meanings.
So I have a lot of personal thoughts on this. And I talk about it in both my pseudoscience class and my forensics class. And it's just no. So I mean, obviously no, because we're talking about myths, so we're gonna bust it anyways. But it's quite silly to think that you need one that the jumbled mess of dreams can be dissected in any way. Um, but also that we might need somebody else to be able to interpret those dreams for us. Like, I know that there are people who make their living off of,
Yeah.
being able to interpret your dreams for you. And what I tell my students is when you're really stressed, you might have a stress dream. You don't need anyone to tell you that that stress dream is because you're stressed, because you're aware that you're stressed. So anyone who's trying to tell you something beyond what you're already aware of is probably making up nonsense.
Yeah, and there's so many different versions of this nonsense, right? Like, so some of it's like, oh, unfulfilled desires or your deep, darkest desires are released in your dreams, or others, it's your fears come out in your dreams, or maybe it's just that I don't know.
Mhm.
What was I reading the other day? That something about tunnels, like was about new life, like just weird certain
Yes.
imagery means certain things.
Yeah, I actually had a student do one of their truth booth projects in past years on dream analysis and how different books or different time periods will suggest that different imagery means something completely different. So, like, in one context, teeth falling out could mean you're stressed, but in another, it's like a bad omen, right? And so if there's not even consensus amongst the quote unquote field of dream interpretation, how are we to believe that any of it is not nonsense?
Yeah. And we can blame Freud for this, right?
We can Oh, yes, I was just gonna that was gonna be my question to you is, what's your thoughts on Freud? Mine aren't positive.
So I feel like most modern psychologists, they use a little bit of an eye roll when Freud gets mentioned,
Yeah.
because he did, I think, lead us so far astray in a lot of ways. It took a long time to come back from.
Yeah.
But there's something about Freud's theories that capture people's imaginations, right? And because he said it and he's such a revered figure, it's like, well, if he thought they meant
Right.
something, they must mean something.
Yes, people and I think people are just generally drawn to the idea of the unconscious and being able to unlock or tap into what's not,
It's just
at
the
the
same thing
surface.
about the
And
10% of the mind, right?
yes.
It's like this wanting for there to be
Yeah.
more all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. And that, like, through these processes, like, you'll be able to unlock that. Um, and that's just not how it works.
Here debunking myths and dreams, I
Yeah.
at the same time. All right, here's a favorite one of mine. Listening to Mozart makes you smarter.
What a wonderful example of correlation is not causation.
Talk us through that.
Um, yeah, so that's been around for a long time, and I do a true false quiz at the start of my intro to psych class, and that's always one of them that students will, like, more adamantly debate, like, "Oh, yeah, that has to be true," or, like, that listening to Mozart at birth increases intelligence,
Really,
like
people
that.
advocate for that
Yeah,
really
like,
strongly?
that makes sense in their mind, like, as truth. Um, and then I, like, will use that moment to be like, "Well, stay tuned because in 2 weeks, we're gonna talk about correlations, and this will all make sense," right?
Hang on,
Um
in your quiz, just for those that might be thinking of taking this class, are they all false?
No, they're
Oh,
still
okay,
they
okay.
do switch back and forth between true and false, and it's not for any points, it's just for fun, and we do a little class
All right,
debate.
so it's not a complete trick.
Right.
All of them are actually
Yeah.
okay. All right,
No,
fair
but
enough.
they are all connected to, like, topics that we'll cover later in the semester or just, like, general illusions and whatnot,
Yeah.
but, yeah, so it's a good time, but yeah, correlation's not causation, so two
Right.
variables can be related, but there's usually some additional outside third variable that might actually be the cause, which in this case is most likely good parenting. So people who care enough to play their children some Mozart are also gonna be the parents that will read regularly to their child. put their child in after school programs or classes or even like, baby gymnastics or whatever it is. They're spending more time with the child, and those things are going to be linked or correlated with, better or higher IQ moving forward.
Right. So just because those people that listen to Mozart generally are more intelligent does not mean that listening to Mozart causes you to be more
No, we
intelligent.
could just play other music to our babies that's not classical. Like if they want to listen to some 2000s hip hop, as long as I'm still reading and, participating and doing all those other things, that child's not going to have a different IQ than the child that listened to Mozart.
Yeah. Fabulous. I hope all the parents listening, you can put on whatever music you want.
Yeah, when there's a nice beat, is a beat is gonna like rock that baby to sleep.
Love it. So I do want to touch on some of the experimental evidence in this field that has
Mm,
essentially been over um, exaggerated. So there was a study, and I'm going to butcher the date. I think it was in the 1960s that came out to say
maybe.
that listening to music while doing a little reasoning tests. So these were college students listening to the music. While they were listening to it, they would do better on the test than absolute silence. And so this has been, over
Mhm.
exaggerated. Okay, so listening to Mozart makes you do better on these tests. But what came out afterwards was that it, again, could have been any music, that this is sort of more of the optimal arousal idea that we do well when we are in that sweet spot of arousal. If we're very unmotivated, we're bored, we don't do well.
Mhm.
If we're overstimulated and stressed, we
Yeah.
don't do well. But if we're in that sweet spot, we do well, and maybe Mozart is just one of many tools that can help us get into that sweet spot. What do you think of that?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that makes complete sense, and the music is gonna help to, like, somewhat drown out your surroundings, and so we know some people get test anxiety, right, which puts them in that overstimulated, and
Yes.
so if that's something that can then bring them back to that sweet spot because they're not, like, hearing the person next to them shuffle their papers or whatever, that could leave them in that more optimal area to do well.
Yeah. You saying that just reminded me of when I was in high school and I was taking a test, and one of the proctors of the test liked to wear stilettos like I do. And as she walked up and down proctoring this exam, I just got so distracted by the sound of these heels. So I guess I was too stressed.
Yes, I my students have exams today, so I have my flats on because I know
You're
that
such
sometimes I have squeaky shoes and just hearing me squeak around the classroom is probably not ideal.
Yeah, okay, I will be a better person, and when it's exam day, students, I promise you I will put on flat shoes. Alright, I think we have one more to go in my,
Yeah,
myth-busting section before we get into forensic and
okay.
legal myths. Learning styles, you mentioned this one before. What do we know about learning styles?
So, learning styles are interesting because I feel like it really, like, took hold of education for a while there, and there was, like, some schools, creating new policy like, or wanted teachers to take the extra time to try to match each of the students' learning styles or to make sure that each assignment can also be present, visually and auditory and tactile, and to do all this extra work just for us to find out that your preference doesn't actually mean that it's helpful.
Yeah. So this one I think is one of those ideas that's really sticky again. Like people want this to
Yes.
be true. So my husband, who I think you know works in the Navy, he's just learning how to be an instructor in the Navy recently.
Yeah.
And he said that in their course, they talked about learning styles and they even made them do the quiz. So you had to take the quiz to find out what your learning style is. And the idea is that you could then, as an instructor, teach to your students specific learning styles. So tell me,
Yeah.
why is this bad advice?
So, I mean, one, burnout for the instructor because that's a lot of extra work. But we often do a lot of extra work for things that are actually beneficial,
Yes, we
like
do.
providing feedback to our students. And that's important because it does improve results. But when it comes to learning styles, from what I can remember from my wonderful students' presentation, shout out Piper, was that um, the research shows that just because the students have a particular preference, say I am a visual learner, so I need everything to be like, I can't read the book. I need you to be presenting it to me or something along those lines. Um, it can create this fixed mindset of like when things are presented outside of my learning style, I am not capable of learning. Therefore, I'm not going to
Mm.
try learning, right? And then it's going to prevent you from being able to be open to have that growth mindset that like, just because this isn't my preferred way, um, I can still do it. But it also the research shows that just because a student has a preferred learning style, they don't actually do any better when that style is what's used to teach them. And so it really is just like a mental game of people having everyone has a preference for all things, but it doesn't always mean that that preference is benefiting you.
Yeah, yeah. I reassured my husband that despite the fact that he was getting this bad advice, that it would be okay. Because what I've heard is that most teachers' reactions to this news or to the belief that learning styles exist is not to have some students in the classroom learn in one way and other students in the classroom learn in a different way, but to
Right.
have the whole class do it one way, maybe
Yeah.
a lecture, and then have the whole class look at a diagram, so something
Mhm.
visual, and then have the whole class do an activity, maybe something tactile.
Yeah.
And so that actually can be beneficial simply because repetition's
Repetition.
beneficial.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so if you're adapting to the learning styles by essentially teaching information in multiple ways, that can be a good thing.
Yeah.
What would be problematic is if we started, I don't know, splitting our classroom and having them doing different work
Oh,
each.
for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Burnout, as you mentioned, plus wouldn't actually necessarily be beneficial.
Yeah, once we know that it doesn't actually help the student learn any better than any of the other ways. And there's so much wonderful literature on, best practices for teaching. And so if
Shout out to Cattle.
yes, shout out
Mhm.
kettle. So if you're following those and your instructions are clear and the goal of the assignment is applicable and you know that retention or repetition piece is built in there, like the students are gonna be able to learn, even if it's not necessarily always in their preferred modality. But using more than one modality, as you mentioned, is definitely still a benefit. It's just you don't need to be doing it because of a student's preferred learning style.
Yeah, no, and I think it really is useful for us as instructors to remember that you usually have to hear something more than once to learn it, right? I mean, we sometimes on a really good day you might hear it once and you're done,
Mhm.
but in reality, most of us it clicks the second or the third time we hear it. I am very lucky in one of my classes in research methods to have a tutor.
Oh, very
Shout out to Drew, my tutor, who's amazing, who will one-on-one tutor my students, and he'll say what I said, but in different words, right? In a
yeah.
different way, and probably less of an academic-y way, which is
Yeah.
is really useful just to hear it again.
Mhm.
So if you're a student listening, definitely go to the tutoring services, and if you're a professor listening, Cattle, Chris Bespi's team over there is just
Yeah.
amazing at helping you design your courses.
So great.
I'm gonna shift gears now, because
Okay.
as you mentioned, I've been asking you to speak outside of your expertise here.
Just a little.
Just a
I'll be
tad.
an expert by the time I'm teaching the class, don't worry.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I should be, right? I'm gonna move into your area. So you're a legal psychologist,
I am.
and I know that that's super exciting to all of our students who believe it's gonna be like CSI. So
Yeah.
I think that's actually the first myth I want you to debunk. What is it actually like being a legal or maybe a forensic psychologist?
Yeah, so at UWGB, I teach the forensic psychology class, and I'm aware that each semester, at least half of the students in the class are taking the class because they want to be criminal profilers, like on Criminal Minds,
I need to
or
watch
at least
Criminal
like
Minds. I haven't
really,
seen it yet.
yeah, or you gotta watch it. It's so good. Yeah. So whether they actually want to do that or they just love Criminal Minds and they think that that's what the class is. So sadly, on day one, I have to do some myth busting that in fact that's not forensic psychology is just clinical psychology but applied to the legal system. So instead of your clients being like uh you know a house a house, yes, a house. I was gonna say even know where my brain is
The
trying to
doctor
go.
house?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm
Instead
with
they
you.
so forensic psychology is just clinical psychology, but applied to the legal system. And so instead of having your patients be just run of the mill people, they're going to be people who are just connected to the justice system, whether they are currently incarcerated, previously incarcerated, whether a family member is incarcerated, or the person that's doing like the assessments for competency to stand trial, child custody disputes, insanity defense. So it's all just using your clinical degree, but with the legal system, right?
Right.
And so those people could also then just be clinicians as well.
Yeah, this doesn't sound as fun.
Right. Whereas criminal profilers, which is a myth all of its own, which, sorry, forensic students, will be covering that after exam one, so on Thursday. Um, those are FBI agents, so that's law enforcement. And although on the TV show they do make it seem like you have to have this clinical background to be part of these organizations, that's not necessarily the case. And
So if you wanted to be a criminal profiler, you'd have to go through a law enforcement career in that
exactly,
class
yeah,
way.
you'd have to be in law enforcement for a significant amount of time, right? You'd probably start off with police work, and then eventually you'd be transitioned to the FBI, and then once you've spent, maybe a decade or so in the FBI, then you could move to one of the branches. So, like, they have child crime, white collar crime, the serial crime, and probably one or two other ones that I'm just not remembering. And that's how you would do that. And actual profiling is not like it is on the TV show. So that's a myth all in of its own. That type of profiling is actually junk science.
Oh,
It's
indeed.
mostly wrong historically at those original profiles of people. But we find that profiling today is more using like computer software.
So tell me, what is profiling today?
Yeah, so it's a lot of, well, one, we don't have as much serial crime as we used to,
That's good.
and that's wonderful, and that's because of advances in forensics, not forensic psychology, just forensics, so like crime lab stuff, and so we're able to catch people before they become a serial offender.
That's nice to know.
And so there's just much fewer crime that is serially linked. And so they're just not needed as much. But when they are used, sometimes it's consulting. They don't try to make such broad statements. Like some of the examples I show in class are statements, where someone is profiling the crime scene. And one of the items is like the person is crazy like a fox. Well, what does that mean? How does that make any sense? Once we even catch the guy, how would I evaluate if he was crazy like a fox?
Well, obviously he's
Like,
got a bushy tail. I mean,
right?
they should see this is clear.
Yeah, and so, like, there was a little bit of nonsense that was happening in those
Okay.
early days of profiling. Yeah.
All right.
So another thing that was talked up, but people love Criminal Minds. I love Criminal Minds.
I'm gonna start
We're
watching.
gonna start watching Criminal
Yeah,
Minds. We'll have criminal watch parties.
this sounds fantastic, but
But
we're not gonna do it as a
but
job, is what you're telling me.
yeah, but we're gonna know that it's made for TV.
Made for TV. Oh, how disappointing. All right, I have on my list here of other things that I wanna know whether they're true or not. Well,
Mhm.
actually, spoiler, that they're not.
All false.
They're all false. If this is the test that's rigged. All right, tell me why bite mark evidence is junk.
Yeah. So bite mark evidence is probably one of the things that I like to rant the most about. So I'm gonna keep it short and civil. So bite mark evidence was something that randomly just kind of started by actual dentists, and they made up the term forensic dentistry. So we know we have regular dentists; they clean your teeth.
Oh, yeah.
They're great at that.
We're not
That's good.
attacking all the dentists.
Yeah, you should get your teeth cleaned if you want to keep them. And then we had the field of where they use dentistry to compare the teeth of a deceased body to dental records,
Okay.
right? To match somebody, to identify them in times of war or other attacks in which you cannot just look at the body and say, oh,
And
that was
that's true?
Joe. And that is also true,
Okay, cool.
right? Because we have the actual teeth and the actual dental records. We can see if those match. And then somehow, some way, somebody decided we can also do that on bodies. And that's when things went really wrong because skin is not a mold. It's not a Play-Doh mold, right? And so a group of dentists decided that they were now forensic dentists, and that this worked and was successful, and they could dub other dentists to now be forensic. So there's not like there's this verification process or this training or anything that's involved. It's just if one dentist says that you're now a forensic dentist, you're now a forensic dentist, which is quite troubling. And there were many, many wrongful convictions tied to these cases in which dentists claim that the teeth of this innocent person, but what they believed to be was the perpetrator, matched the markings on bodies. Once we started to investigate this further, we can see that that's just not how bodies work. So if you were to bite somebody, it's possible, depending on how long that body is out before it is found, that the marks could look wildly different.
Mhm.
It's also very possible that when you bite somebody, the marks will make it look like you are missing a tooth when you're not, or that a tooth is present when it's not. And it's just because of the elasticity of skin, and how hard the person bit somebody and where they bit somebody, whether it's a body part that has more muscle or not, like, it can look completely different to the point that when we do actual, like, experimental trials, dentists are more wrong than they are right.
Oof.
Like, it is very hard to predict, and that includes things that are not actually bite marks. So in many of these cases, it was actually insects or other animals that caused the marks on the body, or just regular bruising.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was quite bad, and there are some forensic dentists, whom I won't name for civility, who were more tied to wrongful convictions than others, who were just more adamant, who were doing more than what they should have been, who were testifying in multiple states. Like, if you wanted to try to say that there was bite marks, you would call this guy, and he would come in, and he would do his special method, which just involved using a black light, and he would claim that he could find bite marks that nobody else would be able to identify, and there's video footage of him taking molds of people's teeth and implanting them into bodies to create marks that weren't there necessarily
Oh my
before.
goodness.
And he has been tied to at least 11 or 12 wrongful convictions that have been overturned, just him alone.
Wow.
And
And of course, as a jury member, this would be convincing, right? Is it
extremely
dentist
convincing.
somebody I trust?
Someone with official,
Yeah.
like, ooh, a forensic dentist. That sounds like so fancy, like the head of all dentists, right? And so you would assume then, I mean, and the courts are allowing them to testify,
Yeah.
right? And so
I would have
putting
to
to
you.
this, yeah, I mean, anybody could talk about, I mean, we have rules about what's supposed to be allowed in court. And so if someone's up there talking just because I don't understand it, I would take their word. They're an expert,
Right,
right? That's why they're
right.
being called in, and so it's not at all surprising that when someone goes on the stand and says, "I am," and these people were I am 100% confident that that man's teeth created these marks on this body, like, they committed
Wow.
this crime. Um that's really powerful. It's
Yeah.
not surprising that, and then that would be the primary evidence of the trial, right? And then that person's convicted, and it wasn't until after more research was done that not all of those convictions could then be overturned.
Wow. So, for some of the other myths where, like, there's a kernel of truth, is there any kernel of truth to bite mark evidence? Is there even a little bit where it might be useful?
Not when it comes to marks on a body. Like,
Okay.
there's just so much variability in what that mark could look like. Like, maybe we're able to distinguish that this is a human mark compared to an animal, but even that, some of these older cases suggest that we weren't that good. And so now it's kind of like we shouldn't even really be
Wow.
trying to do that. Unless the victim is alive and says, "This person has bit me," um, or we find saliva around the mark, right? Like, so there's other DNA techniques that we could also be incorporating, that would allow us to better guess that, yes, like this is from a bite and
Ah,
not a weapon of sorts or something.
all right. So bite mark evidence
Yeah.
fully debunked.
Get out of here. Yeah.
All right. Next one to debunk is lie detectors.
Mm,
Lie detector machines, the sort that you see in CSI or other
yeah.
shows, do they work at all?
So, working at all, yes. Working well enough that they should be allowed in court, no. So they're actually
Okay.
not allowed. So the lie detector, fancy name polygraph, it has a much longer, fancier name. I don't remember it, but the polygraph is generally considered a lie detector machine. It's going to measure your heart rate, your breathing, your pulse, and that's supposed to be able to let us know whether or not you're lying, right? But those things are also very closely linked to you being nervous. And when someone is questioning you about if you murdered somebody, you could suspect that that might make you nervous. And so when we do controlled studies looking at polygraph outcomes, we see that the error rate for a polygraph is quite high. So we will accidentally misidentify an innocent person as someone who's guilty with like an error rate of like 30%. So like, just because they're nervous and it makes the outcome look like they're lying.
Right. So this one sounds like it's riskier for innocent people to potentially be caught.
Yes.
And presumably potentially guilty people might also get away with it if they can appear calm and slow their pulse and
A few,
things.
yeah, so there is still a big error rate for the guilty people too, but I think it's a little closer to, like, a 20% gap, which does mean that there are some guilty people that are then getting away with the lie, um, but it is obviously much more concerning that there are innocent people who are now
Right.
being told that they're guilty. And so currently, because that error rate is so high, and error rate or known error rate is one of the Daubert criteria, which is what the courts use to determine what type of evidence can be presented. We now no longer allow polygraph evidence into court unless under special circumstances, in which both parties have agreed, like ahead of time, that they want to use this.
Okay.
But generally speaking, if police are currently using it, it's a way to try to like elicit a confession.
Okay.
And so it's not going to be presented in court, but they could use it as like a false evidence ploy and say that you didn't pass when you did, or try
Right.
to just get you kind of off your game during an interrogation.
All right. So a piece of advice for anybody who's under a lie detector test, they
Yes.
could be lying to you.
Right. But that's another issue because we do use the polygraph still for most of our federal agencies. So if you want to become an FBI agent to work for Criminal Minds, you will be required to take a polygraph before you're hired, and then you'll be required to take regular polygraphs for your entire employment.
Wow. So they're just admitting that I guess some people won't get hired in those positions because of those
Exactly.
false error rates.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yep.
All right. I got one last one for you, Danielle, before I let you flip the script on me and
Okay.
you can ask
Yes.
me questions. This one is about eyewitness testimony and whether memory, well, we know it's not infallible completely, but how good is memory?
So that's a great question. And my forensics class has just finished up our eyewitness section. And if you ask any of them, I think they're all in a bit of a panic right now from the questions I've most recently received, like that we just can't trust anything anymore. But that's not the case. Yes, eyewitness memory is not perfect. It is the leading cause of wrongful convictions. But wrongful convictions are only a small subset of the larger true convictions in which eyewitnesses do just fine. And so it is an issue that we need like police reform to try to address, as we know that there are certain tactics that police can or should use that will help witnesses to be more accurate. Um, but there's also, just general factors that we can't control that do make our memories like not awesome sometimes. And so this one, I think, is not, um or the idea that memory is like a recording device, that's we got to bust that myth. That's not true. We've all forgotten things or misremembered
Right.
or thought Susie was wearing a blue shirt and it turned out it was red or whatever it was. But then but overall, our memory is not so bad that we can't like function in the world. Like we shouldn't disregard someone's testimony just because they were an
Right.
eyewitness
We don't want
or
to throw out all eyewitness testimony.
right. That would actually give criminals way too much leeway. Because a lot of crimes, the eyewitness is the only evidence. Most crimes committed are going to be like burglary or theft in which maybe someone saw the person running away, and that's it. That's the only evidence. And so without that testimony, we would not be able to prosecute criminals to the same extent.
Right. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Again, husband driven.
Yeah.
So in our household, I'm known to be the one with a bad memory, and he's
Mhm.
known to be the one with the good memory. And he brings this up on more than one occasion, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Mm.
Is our ability to judge our own memory, is it relatively accurate? Like I am very unconfident in my memories, and he's very confident. Is our confidence related to how actually good we are or not?
That's such a good question. I feel like that might be more related to your metacognition abilities. And so if you're listening to the feedback that your memory is not so great and you're actually like sitting with that and you're accepting that feedback and or at least seeking that feedback, then you might be more accurate at determining whether or not you have a good memory. Whereas folks who might not be seeking that feedback or might not have someone to provide them that feedback so often, they might not realize, right? Because a lot of times with memory, it's hard to know when we were wrong because we're not necessarily told that's not how this happened, right? That you're
Mm.
misremembering. We know that like, oh, we forgot our keys or we left our water bottle on the counter or something like that. But that could easily be like, well, I was just really busy this morning or something. But to actually be told like you're not remembering that correctly is not something that actually happens very often. And so
Interesting.
without that feedback, it's hard to know for sure how good your memory actually is.
So most of us, other than me,
Yeah.
thanks for that, babe, are unaware of how good our memory is because we don't get feedback on it very often.
Right.
Right.
But I would guess that your memory is actually much better than you think it is, because you wouldn't have been able to get to where you are if your memory if you
What?
really had you know, I think it might just be maybe selective memory.
Well,
Some things
I
are
do wonder whether there are different types of memory, right? And so obviously I can memorize a lecture pretty
right.
well.
Yeah.
But memorizing, I don't know. For example, I don't think I'd be a very good eyewitness. Like if you asked me, was that person short or tall
Yeah.
or what was their hair color, I probably
Yes.
wouldn't remember. But that might be more of a problem with me just not encoding it in the first place. Like I just don't
Right.
maybe care. That sounds
Yeah.
terrible.
I am a wildly unobservant person. I am
Right.
very known to completely miss like I went out of my apartment this morning and there seems to be like a lot of construction that's happening next to my apartment. Like enough construction that I should have noticed before today that it was happening. Like the mounds of dirt that are now there that I don't recall ever being there, like could not have happened between me getting home last night and, 7:30 this morning, right? And so clearly this has been going on and I've just not noticed it. And so yeah, I do think it is different types of memory and that yeah, that encoding is definitely gonna be a big role in, like, was this something that was worth paying attention to? And, like, I think I mind my own business, so I'm not interested in what
Very
everybody
good
else
way
is
of
doing.
putting it, as opposed to me just being completely
Right, yeah,
unobservant.
and
I
so,
mind my own
like
business.
yeah, I'm minding my own business, and so, unless you're, like, in my face about something, yeah, I might not have realized that there was a crime that was happening.
All right, so Danielle and I, not great witnesses. Somebody's going to play this podcast back one day when we're sitting in a courtroom.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to switch gears to my last part of the podcast
Yes.
today, which is on empathy myths. So
I'm
anybody
so excited to learn.
Yeah. Anybody that knows me knows that empathy is my area of research. And actually, I recently just published an article called Seven Empathy Myths,
Excellent. Timed.
yeah, perfectly timed, aiming to sort of debunk these common misconceptions about empathy. Now, we don't have time to go through all seven, so plug for my own article.
Nice.
But Danielle, what do you want to know about empathy? And what do you think might be some myths that I could debunk for you?
Oh my gosh. So myth-wise, oh, that's my I'm like, I don't what do I even know about empathy? I feel like and I know you've done some other podcasts on empathy that I just haven't caught up on yet.
That's all right. I won't hold
I'm
it
a little
against you.
backlogged in my Psych and
Is
Stuff
it?
podcast. But it is on the listen list. There's only just so much time in the morning to
Absolutely.
listen to a podcast. Um, oh, what's the myth that you are always most excited to teach your class? Like, 'cause I assume, like, as professors, we always like to add in the stuff that we want to
Yes.
talk about if it's relevant to
Yes.
the class. So when you teach your information literacy class, Myths of Mind, what's your like, I can't wait to share
All
or
right.
your
Yes.
favorite out of the 7?
Okay. Oof. There's two reaching for the top spot.
Okay, let's do both.
Okay. So these are both myths that I love to talk about because
Okay.
actually debunking them is a happy thing.
Oh, nice.
So the first one is that empathy causes burnout. So this is the idea that when we're
Yeah.
feeling for people and we're putting ourselves out there, that's going to make us more likely to burn out. And this is a particular concern for physicians, nurses, emergency workers, social workers, anybody who's engaging in empathy regularly like
Yeah.
that. And it is true that these professions have incredibly high rates of burnout. And so again, correlation, right?
Yeah.
But the evidence actually suggests that empathy is not only not a cause of burnout, but isn't even reliably correlated to burnout.
Mm.
And it all comes down to exactly what we mean by empathy.
Mhm.
So in this case, feelings of like concern, compassion, I feel
Yeah.
sorry for you, I feel bad for you. All these kind of things are actually negatively correlated with burnout, which means the more compassion and concern I feel for you, the less likely I am to burn out.
Yeah.
The same is true for cognitive types of empathy, which is where we're sort of like understanding what you're going through without necessarily having that emotional
Mm.
response, negatively correlated with burnout again. The only type of empathy, and I'm going to put it in scare quotes, that is positively correlated with burnout is personal distress. So this is when you're
Ugh.
distressed, so I am mirroring
Yeah.
that distress.
Mhm.
That mirroring of those negative emotions, that is related to increased likelihood of burnout.
Yeah.
But that's just one tiny niche part of what we
Mhm.
think of as a much broader concept.
Yeah.
And so most of the time, people who are high in empathy
Mhm.
are also less likely to burn out. And theoretically, although this is just ideas right now, speculation, this could be the more empathic you are, the more you put yourself out there for others, the more social support you get back in return. And so these sort of people, those that are highly empathic, are more likely to have wider social support networks, closer friendships, and all of these things are related to less chance of burning out.
Yeah, I think there's some positive psych research that also suggests that, like, those that maybe are more empathetic, but also, have more gratitude or potential forgiveness, which might be related, I don't know, are also then gonna be, like, better citizens. Like, they're more tied into their community, they volunteer more
Yeah.
often, they vote consistently, and so when you are doing those things, then you're gonna build those social
Hmm.
connections, which we also know is a buffer for hard times, and we see more resilience in people who have a stronger community.
Absolutely.
And so I can totally see how having more empathy could actually be a buffer to burnout
Yes.
instead of the cause.
And I think so. I think this is a wonderful sort of positive message. It also means that we don't want to tell people don't empathize, like to try and cut yourself off.
Mhm.
That's not the message here. It's empathize in the right way. Essentially, you just want to avoid that mirroring of the distress. And then we can make this make sense, right? If you're a
Yeah.
physician or a nurse and a patient's coming in and they're screaming and they're bleeding and they're terribly upset, it is not useful for anybody for you to also be screaming,
Right.
tearful, and incredibly upset.
Oh my gosh, do you imagine?
Yeah, not
The
useful for
doctor's
them, not
office.
useful for you. And so we want to encourage
Yeah.
empathy without the distress part. That
Mhm.
that seems to be the most protective
Yeah.
kind of burnout.
Having care for patients without mirroring those same symptoms,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. All right. That
What
was myth number one.
Yeah, what's number 2?
So myth number two is I'd love debunking as well, especially for this
Mhm.
current generation of our students. So this is the myth that empathy is declining across generations and that every subsequent generation is essentially worse than the one before.
Okay.
Well, it turns out that's not true.
Mhm.
I was involved in a research project with the original team of authors who showed this decline from the 1970s all the way through to about 2008.
Okay.
And they showed this decline, very convincing
Mhm.
evidence. Then it started going up. It has been rebounding since 2008, and we're now back up almost to the highest level we've ever had
Oh
on
my gosh.
record.
Okay.
So it actually turns out that the worst people are the millennials.
Oh,
We're the
no.
bottom of that, the V curve, right at the bottom of people that were about 18 years old in 2008, which incidentally is
Mhm.
exactly me. So
Okay.
this is the bottom of the graph, but today's generation, they're coming back up.
That's so exciting.
Yes, I love this one because it pushes
Okay.
against the narrative
Yeah.
that young people today just are awful and they're terrible people and being
Yeah.
corrupted by social media or AI or whatever the current bogeyman is.
Well, and I think that is so important because a lot of the research around, like, how do we combat misinformation, which hopefully is the goal of our classes of how do how are we supposed to interpret this? But then also, if we have someone who's close to us who has you know, these wrong ideas, wrong information, misinformation, have been influenced by disinformation. Like, how do we help, right? Um, I know in your class, the psych myths maybe not so incredibly impactful, but
Oh
for
man, stab me in the heart.
well, I mean, if
You're
I believe in learning styles, I'm not necessarily impacting other people by my belief.
yeah,
But when we look at broader claims from the media about certain topics, those can be harmful sometimes
yeah,
when people are looking at the wrong sources. And so, how do we combat that? And from what I can see in the literature, it's never with facts because that's like trying to yell facts at somebody is not going to actually be like, oh, you're totally right. Let me just forget about what I was thinking.
oh man,
You're going to come back with your own facts.
yeah,
And so it seems that the answer is empathy. Like there is a reason that folks are being drawn to stuff that might not be backed by the general public and without having empathy to try to figure out what that is, as normally it's a loss of community and so they're seeking new community or or something else. And empathy seems to be like one of the main things to actually have some type of conversation that might come to more agreement
right.
for.
It's rather than talking at somebody, talking with them, and
Yeah.
bringing them and you hopefully I mean, one of the beautiful things about perspective
Yeah.
taking is that it brings you both closer together. It's not necessarily about
Exactly.
pulling them over to your side,
Right.
but having that conversation that helps you both to see it how the other person's seeing it.
Yes.
And even if we disagree at the end of it, just understanding that can be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, because there normally is something that is, drawing someone to whatever belief. And we see that, a lot of times people would like to just write them off like, oh, they're just an idiot. And that's not the case. These are generally very intelligent people, um, or at least moderately intelligent. You're right, like the average intelligence, we're not actually it's not a subpopulation of people who didn't go to school or something like that. These are just regular people, and something has occurred that is then, they found their way to whatever this information is, and so without that piece of empathy, that's how we will mend relationships or at least find some common ground. But without that, yeah, yelling facts at someone is not gonna convince them that they're wrong and you're right.
Yeah, it's hard because as I mentioned, so I worked with these original authors, and they're pretty big names in the my little empathy world.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. Still today, they'll get phone calls from journalists being like,
Mhm.
"Hey, so we want to write a piece on like the youth today.
Yeah.
We want you to have a sound bite, a quote that says,
Yeah.
empathy is declining, essentially." And they'll keep saying, "Well, yeah, that's out of date data. Like we have a new study that was published a couple of
Right.
years ago. Like you can read it. That's actually out of date."
Yeah.
And then they just don't use the quote, and they still run the article as they always intended to run it, because that's the message they wanna sell.
Right.
And unfortunately, despite the fact that I'm trying to end on a good news note here, good news isn't usually what sells, right? That's not
Yeah.
when it's gonna get you all the clicks.
Mhm.
And so it's difficult to sell a good news story sometimes.
Yeah. Because people are much more pulled by emotional news, and anger sells more than anything else.
Anger does so. That's why Ryan's podcast gets so many more likes than mine.
Could be.
The empathy podcast versus the Amber podcast. Which one will win? All right. Well, thank you so much, Danielle, for coming in
For
today.
having me. It was a wonderful time.
Thanks. Yeah. Psychology and Stuff is brought to you by Good Cause Productions at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. The executive producer is Ryan Martin, the production manager is Rachel Sankey, and our creative director is Jenny Young. The media engineer for this episode is Rachel Sankey, supported by our technical director, Al Kuhn of LiveX. Special thanks to my guest today, Dr. Danielle Sneyd. If you haven't already, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. I'm your host, Alison Jane Martingano. Keep being amazing.